Right now, as you read this, you're hearing a voice in your head. It's narrating these words back to you. You've had that voice your entire adult life. You probably can't imagine what your mind would sound like without it. Every thought, every plan, every memory comes wrapped in language. And then there's them. For most of human history, your ancestors lived without that voice. They didn't have a word for tree. They didn't have a word for tomorrow. They didn't have a word for I. So what did they talk about? And how did they even think to ask? Here's what we know for sure. Anatomically modern humans, people who looked exactly like you, have been around for at least 200,000 years. Some estimates push that to 300,000. But fully modern complex language, the kind with grammar and syntax, and the ability to say, if I had brought the right spear, we would have caught the deer yesterday, may only be 50,000 to 100,000 years old. That leaves a gap of at least 100,000 years, where humans had your brain, your face, your hands, your tear ducts, your laugh, and somehow none of your words. So what filled that gap? Start with what they did. We have evidence ancient humans coordinated group hunts of mammoths and bison. You don't ambush a 4-ton animal without a plan. We have evidence they made stone tools that required dozens of precise steps, passed down across generations. You don't teach toolmaking without communication. We have evidence they buried their dead with flowers, with ochre, with carved beads, going back at least 100,000 years. You don't bury someone with intention unless something inside you needs to. We have evidence they traded materials across hundreds of miles. Shells from the coast end up in inland caves. Obsidian from one volcano ends up in tools half a continent away. You don't run a long-distance supply chain by grunting at strangers. They were doing all of this, without words. Now look at your own mouth. The human larynx sits lower in the throat than any other primates. That single anatomical quirk is why you can speak. It's also why you're the only mammal that regularly chokes to death on its own food. Evolution paid a brutal price to give us speech, which means speech was worth that price. But the larynx dropped into its modern position somewhere between 300,000 and 100,000 years ago. The hardware came first. The software took longer. And here's what's strange. Babies still go through it. Every single human baby spends the first year of life without language. They communicate constantly. They point. They lock eyes with you and wait until you look at what they're looking at. They babble in patterns. They mirror your face within hours of being born. They share intentions before they share words. And then, somewhere around 15 months, the word ball arrives, and the silent system gets buried under the loud one. Most of us never remember it. But every one of us lived there once. And so did every ancestor for 100,000 years. In 1996, the British anthropologist Robin Dunbar published a book called Grooming, Gossip, and the Evolution of Language. He looked at primates and noticed something. Apes spend up to 20% of their waking hours grooming each other, picking through fur, scratching, touching. That's not just hygiene. That's the social glue of the entire group. But there's a limit. You can only groom one other ape at a time. As primate groups grew larger, grooming couldn't keep up. Dunbar argued language evolved to fix this problem. Words let you groom multiple people at once. You could maintain a friendship from across the fire. You could update 3 people on what someone did yesterday, without having to touch any of them. In other words, the first thing humans ever talked about was probably each other. Gossip, status. Who's sleeping with who? Who took more than their share? Who can be trusted? Who can't? That's what built language, not poetry, not philosophy. Talk about people. Then in 2008, the cognitive scientist Michael Tomasello at the Max Planck Institute proposed something deeper. He argued that what really separates humans from every other animal isn't language at all. It's something he called shared intentionality. The ability for 2 minds to focus on the same thing at the same time, and know they're doing it together. A baby points at a bird. The parent looks at the bird. The baby looks at the parent looking at the bird. That triangle, baby bird parent, is impossible for chimpanzees. Chimps don't point declaratively. They never have. You can teach a chimp hundreds of signs, and it will use them to ask for food or attention. But it will never point at a sunset just to share that the sunset exists. That triangle, Tomasello argued, is the foundation of every word ever spoken. Before language was about words, it was about wanting someone else to see what you see. And then there's Stephen Mithen, an archaeologist who proposed something even stranger. In a 2005 book called The Singing Neanderthals, he argued that the precursor to language wasn't words at all. It was music. Long melodic phrases with no internal grammar. Whole sounds that meant whole things. A specific melody for danger. A different one for come here. Another for I miss you. Imagine a humming, swaying species, communicating in a kind of wordless opera for tens of thousands of years. That's the world your earliest ancestors actually lived in. But here's where mainstream linguistics pumps the brakes. Most scientists today think the transition wasn't sudden or strange or musical. They think it was slow. Slow in the way evolution is always slow. The leading idea is called the gestural origin theory. It goes like this. Long before our ancestors could speak, they could point. They could mimic. They could move their hands in shapes that meant things. Sign language doesn't need a larynx. It doesn't need lungs. It doesn't need anything our hominid ancestors didn't already have. And we know it can carry full grammar, because deaf children invent sign languages from scratch when no one teaches them one. In Nicaragua in the 1980s, a group of deaf students who had never been exposed to a formal sign system spontaneously developed one. Within a single generation, it had verb tenses, it had pronouns, it had jokes. That's what linguists believe early humans did, just with their hands. Gradually, vocal calls were added on top. Grunts that started as warnings became labels. Labels became names. Names became sentences. The voice slowly took over what the hands had been doing for hundreds of thousands of years. There's also a much older idea going back to Darwin himself, that human language is the great-grandchild of animal calls. Vervet monkeys today have 3 distinct alarm calls, one for snakes, one for eagles, one for leopards. Each one triggers a different escape response. That's a vocabulary of 3 words. Multiply that by 50,000 years of selection pressure for slightly more precise calls, slightly better memory, slightly faster recognition of who is making which sound, and you get the beginning of speech. So under the mainstream view, ancient humans weren't doing anything that strange. They were doing what every social mammal does, sharing food, sounding alarms, coordinating movement, signaling who is in charge. They just kept refining it. Generation after generation, gesture by gesture, call by call, until somewhere along the way, the calls got specific enough, and the gestures got abstract enough that you could finally say something that wasn't happening right in front of you. That's the moment language was born. Not when humans first made sound. When humans first talked about something that wasn't there. But even after all of that, there's one thing the mainstream story still struggles with. The leap from there to here. Every animal that communicates about now. The snake is right there. The food is over here. The threat is coming. Even apes who have been taught hundreds of signs almost never use them to refer to yesterday. They have no past tense. They have no future tense. They have no fiction. And then there's us. Somewhere in those silent 100,000 years, human beings became the only species on Earth that could talk about something that wasn't real. Not just an absent object. An imagined one. A god. A spirit. A plan for next winter. A story about what your grandfather did when he was a boy. That capacity has no precedent in the animal kingdom. There is no halfway version of it anywhere else in nature. Either you can tell a story or you can't, and only one species ever could. In the 1970s and 80s, researchers tried to break that. They raised chimps and gorillas in human homes. They taught them sign language. Coco the gorilla learned over 1,000 signs. Kanzi the bonobo learned hundreds. They could ask for bananas. They could name colors. They could express sadness. But not once, in any of those decades of research, did one of them use signs to tell a story about something that had never happened. They lived in the present, the way every other animal does, no matter how many words they were given. Anthropologists have tried to date when this happened. The earliest cave paintings we have are roughly 45,000 years old. Some have been pushed to 65,000 years, made by Neanderthals. The first burial goods, things placed in graves on purpose, are at least 100,000 years old. And the first symbolic objects, beads strung on cord, pieces of red ochre carved with patterns, may be as old as 160,000 years. Each of those things requires the ability to think about something that isn't physically present. A bead is just a bead until two people agree it means status. A burial offering is just a rock unless two people agree it means love. Which means somewhere in that long, silent stretch, language stopped being about the world in front of them. It started being about the world inside them. We don't know when. We don't know how. We don't know if it happened all at once or crept in over thousands of generations. The fossils don't preserve thought. We can date a skull. We can't date the first time a person sat by a fire and told another person about a dream. So what did ancient humans talk about before language? Probably each other. The people in their group. Who could be trusted? Who couldn't? Who was missing? Who had just been born? They probably hummed melodies that carried meaning the way perfume carries memory, with no edges, no syntax, no grammar, just feeling. They probably pointed at things and watched each other's eyes to make sure they were both seeing it. They probably laughed at the same jokes for 50,000 years before anyone invented a word for funny. And maybe the strangest part is that all of that is still in you. Before you ever spoke a word, you were that creature, pointing at birds, watching faces, sharing attention, singing without lyrics. Every human baby is, for about a year, a perfect time capsule of what we used to be. Then language arrives. And the older system, the wordless one our ancestors lived in for 100,000 years, goes quiet. Not gone. Just buried under the loud one. And every once in a while, when you see something so beautiful you can't speak, that's the old voice coming back. Older than every word. Still in you. Always was.